Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bootcamp. In today's class, we will be developing one of our projects, Project 7B it is, which is um, we're trying to develop an application to basically do like a countdown clock kind of thing using React and TypeScript. And the way we'll be developing it is using test-driven development with TypeScript.
Yes, that's very important. The thing is that everybody, professional programmers usually have heard about test-driven development, but it is very difficult to follow exactly know how to do the programming part of it, how to move from specification to the actual code, and how to write tests beforehand. And Adil is going to show us by doing that by developing an application in React as using TypeScript. That's controlling.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. So this is the Toptal article we're trying to follow, and basically what they do is the most important thing to initially look at is the different the epic. So it has one epic that we need to develop, which is it's like a use case that has it's simple, but within it you can have multiple user stories. So the epic says, as a user, I need to use the timer so that I can manage my time. And then it's been broken down into three separate user stories. So the first one is I need to start the timer so that I can count down my time. So we need like some sort of start button. And then alongside of it, we have an acceptance criteria. So the acceptance criteria is just some condition that our final application needs to meet in order to be able to meet the requirements of our user story. So we need a button that can start the timer, and we can see that when we click on it, the timer should start counting down. Uh, and then there's an additional thing here that says it should not be interrupted even if the user clicks the start button more than once. So if you continuously click on the start button, it shouldn't restart. It should just continue as it is. Okay, so the second user story here is I need to stop the timer so that I can count down my time only when needed. So we need like maybe like a pause or a stop button. So here's like a stop the timer. So we need to be able to stop the timer, and when we do stop the timer, it should stop the countdown wherever it is. And then again, it says nothing should happen even if user clicks the stop button more than once. So if it's already stopped, nothing should happen. And then the third user story says, I need to reset the timer so that I can count down my time from the beginning. So we have a start and a stop, and then we need a button that will reset the time. Okay. So the if you click on the button, it will reset the timer, and then when you click on it, it should reset to a default value of the time that's being counted down. So that's what we're trying to develop. So it's been displayed like this. So a lot of usually the projects that are developed in the agile methodology, they come with these epics that are created in the initial kind of uh, product backlog thinking kind of stage in our brainstorming. And then as we go along developing the different components of the application, you kind of pick out each epic and then uh, figure out what user stories belong to it. And then so these are figured out by breaking this epic down, and then once you have the user story, you can come up with the acceptance criteria as well. So that's normally what happens in an agile project. And then so here's a wireframe. So a wireframe is just like a hand drawn sketch or a quick visual representation of what we're trying to build. So here you can see this would be our screen, and we will have a clock kind of thing, like a digital clock with the I guess these would be minutes and seconds. And then we'll have these three buttons as we saw in our user stories. the start, the stop, and the reset. So those are functions provided here through buttons, and these would be clickable. And when we click on these, the time would be either the countdown would start, stop, or the time would be reset to our default countdown value. Right, so that's what we're trying to build. Now let's set up our project. So this is going to be done. So this article, they created it in a simple React, and we're going to do this similar kind of thing, but with TypeScript. So okay, so let's open up our terminal window, and I'll go to my GitHub folder, and I'll create a new app here with the create React app, and this will be called timer app, and then I'll use TypeScript. While this is happening, one thing we can do is in the last session, Zeeshan was going over the different issues that were coming up with the uh, TypeScript when using these testing libraries. So I did some research, found this article on Google. Let me see if I can pull it up as well. This is still going. So if I go to Google, for install just an enzyme. There's a Medium article from Hira, something like that. I think it's this one. No, this isn't the one. TypeScript. Not this one. Yeah, this one. So we've already created the React app. It should be done. And we can now we can start installing the dependencies. So we needed to install just an enzyme so we can do the, oops, we need to be able to run these frameworks. So let's run this command, and it will install just an enzyme for TypeScript. And then there's a couple more steps we'll follow along. Okay. And then I'll also open up my VS Code. Open a folder called timer app. So here's our project. Now, what we need to do, we've installed the dependencies here. So we've got enzyme, and we've got jest, and we've got the TypeScript. We've got the enzyme adapter for React 16 as well. So looks like all of this is installed. Now we have to include the configuration files. So we have to go update the package.json file, and we need to add this code. So in our package.json, we can just paste it here.
Adil, can you do us a favor? Can
Yeah.
you paste the URL of this article here? Somewhere we can see.
Yeah, you want this link?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, sure. I can put it in the comments here. I'll also share it with you guys so you guys can access.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Can you share it on the screen in the bottom so that everybody can see it?
Yeah, it's a long link though. I'll try it. Create banner. This one. I think if you just if they go to Google and then just search for install jest and enzyme with TypeScript, it's the first article that comes up. Okay, so I've copied the configuration into the package.json here. So jest is here now. And then the next thing to do is in our source folder, there's a file called setup test. So we can look at it here in our source folder. We have a file called setup test. And we're just doing this so we can make sure that it's working. So we can just copy this code here. What it's just doing is importing enzyme and the React 16 adapter and then configuring it. So in here, I'm just going to replace it with this code. Then, so I'm not using the ejected version. So the ejected version is if you're not using the Create React app. But since we're using Create React app, this one works for us. So we can ignore this and then go to the next step. So step 3 is for the scripts. And here we have, so in our package.json again, we have our scripts here. So this we can replace with the new scripts. It just adds a couple of things. So for the test, it's adding the React scripts for test. So I can get this and replace here. So now we have the updated scripts with our test. And then we can again ignore the ejected version. And then step 4 is we can do a first test run just to make sure that it's working. So we in our create React app, we already have, let me close out of this. We already have our app component, right? And this is going to be running in our, let me run this as well. So I'll do yarn start.
Adil, I've also committed the link in our bootcamp URL.
Okay.
Bootcamp website.
Okay, good. So while this is running, I'll go back and so in our app we already have our because it's a create React app, we already have the app component created here. So we can run a sample test just to make sure that our test script is working. So what we need to do is we need to create this file called app.test.tsx. It might already be here. So here you can see it. And in this file, it's just going to be using, so here what we're doing is importing React first, and then the second command here is importing shallow. So shallow, what it does is, it's from the enzyme framework. It's just going to render whichever component we're calling without calling its child components. So it's just one level down. So we're importing them, and then we're importing the app from our app component. And then let me at least get this. I'll get rid of all of this. And then I have to update this because the project setup is done in a way that app is directly in the same folder here right now, and we're just testing it out first. So here we've imported React and Shallow from Enzyme and then imported our app component. Now what we need to do is do our first test. So here's just a sample test, and I'll just copy this here and then I'll explain what's happening. So we're running a test, just giving it a description saying that it renders the component, and um, it's then using a arrow function to run the actual test. So the first thing here that's happening is we're actually doing the render of the app component. So we've imported it, and now here what we've done is done a just a shallow render of the app component. What's going to happen this way is if the app component has multiple other maybe child components, those would not be rendered. Only the app component would be rendered. And then the next command here is our actual test. So it's doing like a expect command here and calling from the render. And it's running this method called toMatch snapshot. Um, so when you run this, let me just save this and I'll exit out. Come here. And the way to run the test is just you can either do npm run test or yarn run test. Test. Maybe I've skipped over installing something.
I think there is some problem with the package.json file.
Package.json file.
Test. See the script for test. I think run it with npm.
Yeah.
Test specified.
No test specified. Why? Okay, let's just take a step back. We did install the dependencies. We have added this in the scripts. We've added the scripts.
I think you didn't update the scripts. You didn't do step. You didn't do step 3.
This one,
Yes.
Oh, I think maybe I copied the wrong one.
You just have to copy the bold one, not all of them.
Yeah. This is the test coverage. It's already there. Let's try again. No test specified. Weird. Hold on. App.test.tsx. I think I didn't save the method. So what am I missing now?
Error says test is missing. So I guess isn't it required any folder specific folder for test case, or
That might be the reason.
app.test should be in test folder, TESTS.
Yes, I think that's right.
If you check the test code or test,
So
it
this setup test is here, and then you're talking about,
test code app.test.ts.
yeah, it's in the test folder. That might be the reason. Let's move this here. And this would now be a bit updated. Try again. No test specified. Again? Okay. App.test.tsx, and then app. Renders the component.
No test. No test specified is only because of.
It doesn't see the test.
Are you in right folder into the project folder?
Right, good question. No. So this has to be the
Someone named Tahir Ashraf, and they mentioned in the
yeah,
comment.
they're observant. Good. Okay. So now we can try again here. npm run test. Oh, you know what I did? I installed this in the wrong place as well, I think.
Okay,
Just run this again.
sure.
I got
Adil,
to,
I understand it's very difficult to code under pressure, especially when the
uh,
video is running. It puts a lot
Yeah.
of pressure.
so
Zeeshan and I, when we started working, freelancing, one of our customers, the very first customer, and he was paying very well, asked
yeah.
us to basically start coding and share the screen.
He was even asking, run this command on terminal.
Yeah.
And uh, under such pressure, I could not resist, but we had Zeeshan with us, and he performs very well under pressure.
Yeah, Zeeshan is good.
because 50% of programming is perseverance. Just trying
Yeah.
different things and trying to understand that you can do things wrong and then correct it.
Yeah.
Even a single dependency, as I was mentioning last time, even a single dependency mistake it cause you a lot of trouble. It can ruin your whole day.
Especially when you're starting out with the environment and can't figure that out. It's
Yeah.
very demotivating as well.
That's the whole. What we have to teach our students is that that's the gist of programming. Don't get
Yeah.
demotivated. Just keep at it.
Yeah. Yeah. But when it finally works, it's fun.
Especially the students needs to learn that we have a online lot of articles and a lot of information available online. There are a lot of things, so whenever you stuck in something, try out something. If it don't work, must google it. There are hundred of answers available and hundred of solutions will be available, and you can find it, those solutions on the web. And that's important, what to search and what to find where.
Yeah.
Dishan, my pressure point is usually when I'm charging the customer and
Mhm.
I have wasted 3-4 hours of his time. So therefore, what I do is usually stop the clock because I don't want to charge my customers hundreds of dollars without delivering him anything. It it basically alleviates the pressure off me. Then I first correct the problem and then restart the clock again.
Yeah, once the clock is not ticking, then you can do whatever the whole day. Once you are in a right position that you don't charging a customer, but you can, if you initially stuck in a problem, you can do 10 or 15 minutes of research while doing that, but you cannot go beyond that, because customer is definitely paying for the work. So we can then stop the clock and then do a research, or especially in such kind of problems, we can definitely need to put a lot of time in research.
Yeah, sounds fair. It wouldn't be fair to client if you're charging them to learn something.
Most of my customers never said anything, but I didn't feel right. I didn't
Yeah.
feel it is ethical to 10
Agree.
15 as Dishan mentioned 10-15 minutes is okay, but it is if it is going beyond that,
Yes.
then you just stop the clock.
Yes.
By the way, so when we finally are able to run this once it installs, what this does is it creates a snapshot. There's a folder that's created called Snapshot, and then whenever the test is run, it takes a snapshot of our code and saves it as a text. Uh, and the article here, this isn't really using that method. Their tests don't create the snapshot, so that's something additional that's added. So I thought the snapshot was a good way to keep track of what's changing in the app.
I will never use this functionality. What does it do? Takes a picture of the code.
It's like a text-based picture, you could say, kind of. So it whatever is being rendered, it takes a snapshot of that render as a code. So it's like a snapshot as code kind of thing. Okay, so looks like it's done. Okay. Uh, now let's again try this. There we go. So it sees the app test. So it's passed the test. because we were just what was our test doing? We were just looking to match the snapshot, and it's taken a snapshot here, one snapshot written. So when you go to your code again here, the snapshots folder would be created, and inside, so each test that we create, it would create a snapshot for that test, and it would create like whatever the render was done here, it's saved as a text. So, so now our test.
Let's move ahead.
Yeah, I thought I'd lost you guys. Okay. Now we can get to our working on our actual app. Now that our code is working. So what we need to note now is we need to fix up some of the structure here. I'm just gonna get rid of these app.css, app.tsx, because when we're gonna be doing test-driven development, we don't want these to be here. I'm also gonna get rid of this test as well. And yeah, so I'll just keep it like this. One other thing that we might as well install in our dependencies here, because we're going to be using TypeScript. This always happens. So I'm going to install npm install save at types the React DOM. So I have this as well. Okay. I'm just going to get rid of this as well. So, okay, so all we have now is we just have our index.tsx. So let's start new, let's start fresh, and let's create a folder for our components on the right place in our source folder. So, and then inside of it, we can create our app component. And then, so in our app component, we want to first start with our test. So let's create a new file and let's call it app.spec.tsx. And here we'll start to create our first test case for our actual app. And this is now, I'm just going to be following this article. What they've done is here, starting with the test for the app component. So here's the test they've created. I'll do a similar.
The important thing is, before even writing the code, they have created the first test.
Yeah. So this file, the spec, this is going to be the test, right? So inside of this, we need to create the test. So quickly we can do a import React from React. And then we also need to import shallow from enzyme. And we need to import our app component. So the app component is in the same folder we are in. So we just have to do import app from.
I think you have not given the extension to the app.
What's that?
You have not given the extension to the file.
This file, I haven't created the file yet. This is the
Okay.
folder app. Yeah.
Okay.
Because even before creating the file, I'm just creating the test.
Okay.
So we're going to import the app component. And then let's write the test. So we're using scribe here, and we're going to give a description of the test. So here we're just going to say app component renders. Then we want to give it a arrow function. So we want to give it a arrow function here, and inside the arrow function we need to run the test. So with here we need to give the actual test that we're trying to run, the expected result. So the app component should render, and within the app component we always return a div kind of thing. So a div element needs to return, so we can say it should render a div. And then here inside of it we need another arrow function to run this test. And this test will be we need to first run the render for the we need to do a shallow render of our app component. Yeah, so we can create a variable here. Let's just container equals, and we'll use the shallow render and render the app function. And then as we expect it to our container, when the inside of it we want to find a div, and then the length of the div should be something's weird. Container dot find div dot length, and then we want to make sure that it's there's at least one div that returns, and that's our test. Cannot find module, yeah, because we haven't created it, right? So this is our initial test. If we run it right now, it's going to fail because we haven't even created the component yet. So you could try and run it, and what's the expected result here is just going to be that it would fail, saying that you haven't imported the component or it's not found or something similar. Let's see. So the import failed. So that's our initial test, and it's failed because the component doesn't yet exist. So we'll go and create the component now. And to create the component within our app components folder, we'll add a new file, and we can call it app.tsx, which will be our component. And this is just going to be a simple put React from React, and then in our we'll create our app component. We can use a arrow function to do it, and then here we can just return a simple div and give it a class name of container, and then close it, and then export the default app. So now we've created the app.tsx, and we're importing it here, so the error is gone. So let's try and run the test case again. Okay, so it says it's passed now. Let's just do it again. So you can see that the app component renders it's passing. So one test suite, and within the test suite we have one test that has passed.
Therefore, what is the procedure? First, we write a test, then we write the code, and then once we write the test, we'll run it. We'll find out it has failed. Then we'll write the code for the component, and then test it again, and it should pass.
Yeah. So before writing any code, we'll write the test and make sure that first we have the working test, and then it should fail, and then we write the code to make the test pass. Okay. So let's keep going. Now we need to we can work on the app components CSS. So within the same app component file, I'll have another file here called app.css, and to save some time, I'm just gonna grab the CSS they're using here. And I didn't call it app container, I just called it container. So here we have the CSS, and we want to import the CSS into our app. So we can come here and do import app.css. So now our CSS would be imported, and then next what we can do is in our index folder, in the index.tsx file, we have to update where we're getting the app component from. So it's no longer in the same folder here. It's now in the components folder and the app folder. Oops. And then there's a app.tsx. So that's where the app component is coming from. Let's make sure that it's still working. So it looks like it's fine. It's running the test here again. And it still passes, so we're doing fine. So here now we have created our initial app component, and we can make sure just by maybe within the here we can say maybe I just do something like so. Yeah, there we go. And this is our timer. So there we go. Now let's keep going, and now we have to move on to our next component we need to create, which is the timer component. So before we make any code to create the component, we want to create the test. So the timer component is going to be its own component, and it's going to be rendered in the app component, right? So what we'll do is we'll create a test for the timer component within the app components test here. So what we want to do now is, instead of just having the one test, we need to have a second test here that will check if the timer component has rendered. So here right now we've only checked the app component to see if there's a div. Now we need to do another test to make sure that aside from the div, we also have the timer component. So, okay, so now, just as before we imported the app, we again need to import, now we need to import the timer. And the timer we would import, so we haven't created the component yet, but when we do create it, it's going to be, we'll create another folder in our components folder called timer, and then the timer component would be inside of that folder. So if we provide the path, we'll go back one level, and then here we'll have a folder called timer, and inside the folder we'll have a timer component. And it's, for now, it's going to be an error. And then the next thing we need to do is, in our test, we need to add a second test. So to do this properly, every time every time we do a run, we need to do a render of the we need to do the shallow render of our component. So what we'll do is, we'll pull out uh, the code for the shallow render to this container we've created from here, and instead of doing this inside the test, we'll do it outside here. And then this way it's created outside and every test has access to it now. And then what we can do next is add the second test. So here we add the second test, and now we're going to be looking for should render the, there's a thunderstorm outside. So it should render the timer component. So that's my expectation, and then call a arrow function here, and then so kind of like this, and then inside of it I'll have expect using test, and then what am I expecting? What I'm looking for is that within my container, which is my app container, I should have another. I should have the timer component. So I'll do container dot, and then there's a method here called contains matching element. Contains matching element, and then inside of the matching element, I just provide which element I'm looking for, and I can provide the timer component like this. And then I just need to say that this is a true or false, so it should be true. That's what I'm looking for. So that's the test to make sure that the timer component should render inside the app component. And now that our test is done, we can run the test, and what's going to happen again, it's going to say that it's failed because the timer component doesn't exist, so it can't really import it as expected. Now we'll go and we'll create the actual timer component. So let's go to our code here. In our components folder, we'll create a new folder called timer. And then inside timer, we'll have a timer.tsx file, which will be our timer component. Okay, and then inside the timer component, what do we need to do? Yeah, so before we code the actual timer component, we would like to have the test as well. So what I'm going to do is, let me just rename this. Instead of creating the component first, I'm just going to do the test for the timer component, right? Because that's what we need to do. We need to first create the test and then write the component. So next step now is we need to write the test case to make sure the timer component renders. So kind of like how we wrote a test for the app component to check that it renders, like this. We need to do a similar thing to make sure that when we have the timer component that it renders. So now for this code, we have to do, we just write another test so we can import React from React, and then import shallow from Enzyme. And here we want to import the timer component from timer, and this is going to be an error still. We haven't created the timer component. That's fine for now. Okay, and then now we'll have we need to create the test to make sure that our timer component renders. So kind of like what we did here, we have a let container, and then instead of having the app container render, I want to render the timer container, and then run the and actually I'll do the similar kind of thing. I want to have this whole thing. Let me just get this whole thing. And instead of the app, I'm gonna shallow render the timer component, and then I only need one test. I don't need this one. I can get rid of this one.
Adil, what I don't understand is in the first one, the app spec.tsx.
Yeah.
What is the second test doing? But if it's a shallow copy, it will not have the timer component.
So the app component, it's going to, within our app component here, we're going to have our timer component here later, right? When we code it.
I understand that. But if the shallow, I think the shallow, isn't the job of shallow is not to render the...
It's not going to render the actual contents of the timer, but it's going to at least have that it's there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So when it renders the app as a shallow render, it's not going to actually render out everything that's going to be in the timer component, but it will still render that the component is there.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back here. So in our test for the timer component, we have we need to update this. So again, it should return a div because it's a timer component, and we always need to return a div. So it's kind of the similar thing, except within the timer component, we could have more than one div. So instead of having the length of this value to be equal to 1, we can just change this to use being greater than or equal to 1. This.
But in a component, there cannot be more than one in the root.
Yeah, but this is going to search for everything in that component's code, right? So you could have multiple divs within it. So okay, so that's our test for the component function, and now if we see here what's happening, it's still going to be, there's going to be an issue because there is no timer component created yet, so it's going to just fail everything because we're importing the timer component in both of the tests, and then it doesn't really exist yet. All right, so let's close out of these. And now in our timer components folder, we can create the timer.tsx to create the timer component. And here now we can create the component, and let's just get the code from Where is it? Here they've created this timer component. All it's doing is it's importing from React, and then it's what we're doing is creating a class and using a constructor function, and then just calling some more methods here. So this is, I think it's asking for a type. It's saying that it's using any implicitly. For now, let's just keep any. And let's see what happens. It's running. Okay, so now it says we have two test suites, one passed and one failed. So which one passed? We can see. Why isn't it showing? So okay, so the app spec, the app test failed to run because we haven't rendered the, we haven't updated the app TSX. Oh, why is it timer.spec? It should just be like this. Yeah, let's try again. Okay, so the timer spec pass, because why does it pass? Because in our timer spec, we're just checking to make sure our timer component returns a div, and it's already doing this. So it's returning a div and it will pass. And then the app spec, however, it's going to fail because it's expecting the timer component, and we haven't yet coded the timer component to display inside of the app component, right? So what is it saying? It should render the timer component, but it says the value is expected true, but it's receiving false as expected, right? Because we haven't yet updated our app component. So we want to go back to our app component, so app.tsx here, and instead of just having this timer, we need to show our actual timer component. So we can import the timer component from the timer folder and the timer component, like that. And next, we want to call the timer component here. So instead of just having text like this, we'll do timer component like this.
Actually, I think I've lost you. We have lost you. Your screen is hanging.
I think his connection is broken for a while.
Zeeshan, give him a call. I think he most probably doesn't know.
Okay. He's joining back.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, I'm back. Okay, so where was I? I was saying that. Where did you guys lose me?
Please share your screen
Okay,
when you are typing the timer component.
like this, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so now we have the timer component here, and
Mm.
let's see. Run our test. So you see, now we have from our test suites, we have two total. So one for the app, one for the timer. So both have passed, and then the total number of tests is 3 between these two test suites, and all have passed here. Because so what's happened is, if we go back to our tests, the timer and the app. So first, what we did was in our app spec, we created a test to find the to make sure that the app component renders and it returns a div, and then the second test that it returns the timer component, and it's doing this now. And then the next thing we did is we created the timer component test, and right now all we're doing inside of this is to just make sure that the timer component returns a div, at least one div. And it's doing this already because here you can see that it's returning a div. And so let's see, and then we can just maybe, instead of this, we can say that way our timer component is showing up here. And okay, let's see, next. So that sets up our two components here, and then let's keep going with this. So next thing that we're doing is to add a custom CSS property, basically just applying some CSS to the timer component, and using something called a custom CSS property to do this. So custom CSS property is defined like this. So this is at a root scope, so that all the components and all the different elements could have access to it. And then here we've created, so this is like the notation for creating custom property and then giving it a custom name, and then this becomes reusable, so it kind of acts like a variable within the CSS file. So let's just do this. We can create a CSS file. So they're just updating the index.css file. So I'll just grab this, and then in our code we have the index.css file, and I think we don't need any of this. I'm just going to replace everything. So this goes along with the index.css, and then the next thing was to create the timer.css file that goes along with our timer component. So that comes here in our timer folder. So we can create a new file called timer.css. And then inside of here, we'll just have the CSS for the timer container. And that's here. So the container is called, the class is timer container. So this goes along with that. And then as you see here, the different values we're using. So we're using the actual custom properties that are created in the index.css, and then we're just accessing them here. So the timer background color, we're getting the value from the root scope custom CSS property. Like same with all the rest of these. So that's our timer.css. And then what it says next, we have to update the timer JSX to import the timer CSS file. So we have a timer.tsx because we're working with TypeScript. So we just want to import our CSS here. So import, I'm just going to do timer.css. So that imports our CSS for the timer component. And now we have, if you run the React app now, we'll see a simple screen with border on your browser. So here we go. We have a simple border. This timer is just coming from the text I have written inside of my timer component. So I can probably just get rid of it now that I have a box here. So this sets up our initial UI. Let's make sure that our tests are still passing.
I think we lost him again. He's joining back.
I think we are having a monsoon season here, so therefore there are bound to be some trouble.
Yes. And network services are going very bad in these days.
I'm waiting for Starlink, then we'll be free of all this thing.
Sorry?
Kanika, I'm waiting for the Starlink services to do.
Hopefully it had, I don't know when it's finally reached to us.
We need a Starlink for electricity as well. We need to get the power from the stars, and then
If you need a Starlink for everything.
For that, I'm thinking about buying the Apple Silicon MacBook Pro. Therefore, it will run for maybe 20 hours. That's at least what I'm hoping.
really, yeah, and maybe a solar panel along with it.
Yeah,
Okay, so
that's very important.
where am I now? Let's see. So okay, so we have our basic UI with the boxes there. Then let's keep going. We need to create a couple of those buttons. So we needed the 3 buttons: the start button, the stop button, and the reset button. So we need a component that has like the different buttons in there. So now we need to again update the timer spec, the test file, to check if the timer buttons are there or not. So here, this is just the code that's written here to check for the to look if the timer button component is there inside of the timer component, right? So we need to create, basically what we're going to be doing is, as we have the two components for app and timer, we'll have a third component for the buttons, and then we'll be rendering that component inside the timer component. It'll go here. So, but first, before we actually go and code it, we need to write the test. So, and the test will go here in the timer spec.tsx. So before we had just a single test to check if there was at least one div. Now what we need to do is we need to check if the timer button component is there. Okay, so what is it saying? It should, let's just get this and then paste it in here. What we're doing is should render instances of the timer button component. So we need 3 instances of the timer button component. So we're just running the timer button, looking for the timer button component, the name of it, and we should have 3 of them. So that's the test to make sure that we have a timer button for start, stop, and reset. And this would be failing because we have just written the test, but we haven't coded anything. And then let's keep going and create now another folder in our components folder for the timer button, right? And then, so here you go. It's going to fail because it doesn't exist yet, the timer button component. The rest of the tests have passed. Okay, so we're doing fine. Now, so in our timer button component folder, we need to add a file for the timer button.spec.tsx. So this will contain the test to check on the timer buttons. Okay. And here's the test file. Let's just get this and then. Okay, so what we see here is we're importing the timer button, but it doesn't exist yet, so it's going to be an error. Here, I'll just give it a type of any for now. And so let's see, before each, so we're just doing a loop. Right, so what we're testing for here, we're looking for if there's a div, if inside of the container we have a div. So basically we're just looking to see if something renders, if there's a div that comes in. Oh no, my battery is dying. Let's just try and wind this one up quickly before I lose power. So here, just what this is doing is we're just running a loop. So before each test, it's going to do a loop, and it's just going to do a shallow render of our timer button component. And let's keep going. So if we run this test now, it's going to be running. Again, it's going to fail because the timer button component doesn't even exist. So 3 seconds left. Yeah, so it's going to fail. Okay, so now we need to create the timer button component. So let's come back here in our timer button folder and create a new file called timer button.tsx, like this. Okay, and then inside of the timer button folder, or not the folder, I mean the component, we need to have the code for that component. So what's happening here is just importing React and then types for the proper types from here, and then we're just, let me just copy this here so you can see it better. So we've imported React and the prop types, and we created a constant variable for timer button, and we're just giving it two inputs here in the function. So the action of the button and the value. So we're just going to be using the same component for the three buttons we need to create. So the start, stop, and reset. So this is like we're just going to be able to create it dynamically. And these are,
Adil, are you there? I can't hear you.
hello, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so here we go, and then just skip over this. Okay, and then we have the div for the class inside of the timer button function. It's just going to return a div, and then there is these the types for the properties, button action and button value. So one is a function and one is a string, and they're both required. So that's our function for the timer button. Now, if we run the npm test, what's it saying? Should render instances of, yeah. So we haven't created the instances of the type button, so that's why it's failing. So now we can uh, render those timer button components. So in our timer button, in our timer button component, so we're just going to go back to our timer JSX. So our timer file here, and then inside of our div that we're rendering, we need to add the three components that this is looking for. So let's go and see in our return for this div. Instead of returning just an empty div, we need to return this kind of these three buttons, and inside of it we're giving the two values. So the start timer, the stop timer, the reset timer, and then we're providing it some values as well. So the text that will go on the button, and then so let's just get this thing. And here we want to import the timer button. Timer button. Timer button. Here we go. Okay, so we have this. And that just renders out the 3 buttons for our timers. Let's see what happens. I think I want to run this again. I think I have some TypeScript error. TypeScript error. Binding element button action implicitly has any action, any type. This is in our timer button.tsx folder. Timer button.tsx. Right. So I need to define the type.
Adil, are you there? I think we got disconnected again.
Yes.
I think what we are going to do is basically the students have got the hang of it.
Yes.
Adil, are you there? The students have got the hang
Yes.
of it. They can do the rest of the article themselves. And from next week, from next class, we are going to start off on GraphQL. And Zeeshan and Daniyal, you're going to start off with GraphQL, and we are going to basically start developing the client side, how to use GraphQL on the client side in the next class.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. See you guys around. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, guys.